Good evening, citizens, and welcome to another episode of the Shattersong LARP Diaries. Today is going to be another Menhirs Fate episode, and I have the unique pleasure of telling you that this isn't a wiki review, this isn't an opinion piece, and this isn't a hype episode. This is a review. And for that review, a very special occasion, I'm going to need a very special guest. So, special guest, reveal yourself.
Hello, it's me, Amber.
I'm so glad
Hi.
you clarified that. If you just said it's me, half the
It's
listeners
me.
are like, we don't know who that is, and we just never address it ever again.
I never find out.
Yeah,
I mean, every good story needs a mystery, so
it does. And
yeah.
the mystery maybe for this episode is should we do maybe not mystery but some myth busting on how many his
Mm,
fate was, and give a more general overview for how the event was and what we did and what it was like and what was good.
let's get into it. I'm very excited. We're back and we're very broken. It was a very long weekend, but boy, did we have fun.
Oh, yep. The I think the general plan is talking for between an hour and a half, and we'll loosely try and keep it in chronological order. It will not stay that way. That is a
Nope.
promise.
I give it 2 minutes. But yeah, let's go. Where do you want to start?
I'd like to start with our usual disclaimer, is that we are biased, not fully informed, and not official in any way. So anything we say is personal opinion, which is subject to change.
I think it's also probably good that we point out that we came into this as crew and not as players, so our experience might be completely different to those who were on the field, because we saw a very different side to the event.
Mm. But with that said, I'd like to start with that in mind and our disclaimer in mind, that I think this is the best Fest LARP in the UK as of now.
Wow.
I'm
Okay.
going to put my money
Bold.
down on it. I was very excited in the run up to it. I hate sounding American when I say I'm so excited about things, but I was genuinely excited for something to shake up the market. LARP 2.0, right? And I genuinely think that this has hit the nail on the head. There's some things around the edges which need to be fixed, tweaked, and alike, but the fundamental mechanics that a lot of us were really shitting ourselves, like camp attacks, ranged vocal magic, the new global hit system. We all thought, how the hell is this going to work? And it's going to be shit.
Mm.
I heard lots of people be very negative in lots of corners, and I can safely say that you're fucking wrong. People have said that. So if that was you, turn off the podcast and hang your head in shame. Please come back later on so we can double the amount of listens. And that we'll call it quits after you've done that. But fundamentally, just to address a few things off the top, range magic calls worked incredibly well, very thematic.
Mhm.
The camp attacks were actually kind of cool. They didn't add much to the plot. We'll talk about that later. But I thought, crikey, fighting in camps and guy ropes is going to be bad. What about at night? And again, things addressed that, and we'll talk about them later. And finally, from our crewing experience, seeing what the combat system was on the other side and things like something I'd got fundamentally wrong was that if you look at Empire, like if you get cleaved in the arm, you lose that arm, but you're still on your feet. At Menhirs, it's literally global. So if you have heavy armor, if you have enough coverage, like chainmail on your chest and a metal helmet, not thinking of anyone in
Mm.
particular, but if you have the prerequisites for heavy armor, even your unarmored shins that just have pants on, again, why am I sounding American? Just have trousers on, just have pantaloons on, perhaps. If you just got cloth on that, it doesn't matter. You still count as being in full heavy, which makes the theming of your costumes and the accessibility for putting your kit on and the look you present to people so much easier and so much cooler
Yeah.
and easier to process from a combat point of view. And a song calls Crush, which is like the anti-heavy armor thing on you, if that hits you on, the arm, the leg, the chest, the head, it does actually, sorry, it doesn't count for the head. Bear that in mind. But
But
for
and
anywhere else, it did, and it was fucking amazing. I loved it.
it's so good. I also think though we mentioned this on the way in about how Menace Fate are trying to tackle things like like financial accessibility, and that is such a great way of incorporating it because if you're a new player and you can only maybe purchase one piece of heavy kit, you are then you classed as heavy, and that's awesome. Whereas, other systems you need to spend time and resources making your kit and spending money on it, and it's such a great way of bypassing those expenses.
Mm.
And we did say on the run up to Empire, like the traders had such a great time, and the amount of new kit that was on the field, the amount of new weapons, and people were really finding their feet with a new hobby. And I cannot wait to see how people grow their kit. I think such a joy. This is my first time crewing ever, so um, part of this experience was also watching new players have their first time, and that is such a beautiful thing. And I'm sure we'll get into it much more. But yeah, you're right. The combat system here rocks. For me, like S-LARPs, I've only ever had Empire to compare to. I know there's some great one-shot events out there, but I know that a lot of people have been frothing at the mouth for a new Fest LARP to come on the scene, and I think this has come in with such a splash. And I'm really excited to see how this sort of kicks other systems to, try and push the boundaries of what LARP can do. I think in our first evening there, before timing even started, we saw the Menhir itself, and we're not going to spoil it for people who,
Oh, yes.
didn't manage to make it to E1, but boy, is it something to see. And I have yet to see, like technology utilized in a LARP on this scale. And I think Empire, not sorry, Empire, Menhir's Fate are really going to kick things up a notch with how technology is integrated into LARP systems and hopefully get other systems. I mean, maybe you've had some experience of one shots that have done similar things and maybe had SFX and things, but for me, that was the first time I'd seen that kind of, technology put into a tent, and it was beautiful. It felt magical, and
Mm.
we hadn't even got to time in. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think calling it LARP 2.0 is factually correct to have that scale of SFX on the field. The Menhir itself, as Amber correctly said, we won't spoil it for you. Buy a ticket, go and see it.
Mm.
And the battles, you look at smoke occasionally gets deployed in other LARPs. I know Eversley for Flying Lead, I think they blew a door up, which was pretty cool. We didn't have any
Wow.
explosions on the field this time round, but it's a fest LARP. I don't think we're really going to see too much of that. But we had constant smoke, monster suits, lots of battle lines, sort of the grand melee kind of vibes on fields, combined with skirmishing in the forests. The terrain was really good, and the scale
Mm.
of the tents. This is a
Perfect.
professional event site. There was consistent Wi-Fi. There's water. There's electricity. There is fucking lighting, people. The entire
The lighting is incredible.
it's awesome. There's these beautiful sort of maybe 2 or 3 meters in the air on these, yeah, about 3 meters in the air. These poles and these chains of little lovely classic bulbs. I don't know how to describe it. Your classic filament bulb, dull yellow glow, and they've got a few lines of them going right to the heart of camp, and it makes these beautiful lit up roads, and it enabled so much more game at night because you can see what's going on.
Mhm.
It's not flickering little flyers, although those are there. You've got this general ability to see each other, which means that night battles and the like suddenly come to life. And
Especially in the forest. This is a big thing, I
oh,
think,
yeah.
because we spent so much time in the forest. When I first heard that it was going to be festival lighting, in my head I was like, oh, big floodlights, that might make it a bit clunky, but it's really whimsical. It feels a bit like a fairy tale forest,
Yeah.
especially in the skirmish area. And I can imagine as a player walking up to the forest, having it well lit and actually getting there. And you have some dark areas, so don't get me wrong, it can still be a little bit spooky. And we had a great time hiding in the shadows and jumping out on players,
Yeah.
but which I'm sure we'll get into. But also not just the playing field is well lit, but also the crew areas and the OC camping and the car parking. And I remember when we were getting to the site, it's well signed. There are staff, like I think they've outsourced security and things like that. So you feel very safe and you feel very welcome as a player. Um, I I think when you arrive, I'm not sure how it is as a player, but as a crew, you're very well directed to where you're going to be. You kind of know what what's expected of you and what you'll get in return, and it feels like you're very respected as a customer as well as a
Mm.
player, which is nice.
Yeah, this feels like this is a professional outfit. I shouldn't say feels like, because that's insulting
It
the
is, yeah.
time, effort, and money they've put into it. It's a professional outfit. And like you mentioned, there's actual security patrolling the OT area. These are not volunteers. These are professional security guards, big, meaty, scary people, of course, but very friendly once you start saying hello. Actually patrolling the entirety of the OC and the IC camp areas. The IC, we didn't see them IC, I think they had costumes on. But then for OC, you've got the high visors and the torches and everything. And it was like rocking up to, a fair as a kid or going to Duxford on an air show day or something like that. It was done at scale professionally. And I guess maybe to start at the beginning, because that's where all good stories begin. Arriving on site, we're directed up to a clearly marked area for camping. Get our tents down, get our OC stuff set up, and the sign in was nice and easy. There's no massive queue or anything like that. Um, and then once we get onto the actual site itself, they've got this wonderful big field with loads and loads of scope for increasing the size. I think we had, was it 750-ish players to begin with and
Sounds accurate.
150 crew?
Yeah, I'd say maybe slightly less on the crew side. I think we had a few people have to sort of bail because of cars and things, but crew, like player wise, that sounds about accurate.
Yeah, so big, big LARP. It's not like a, 1 or 200 person sort of medium tier. This is a fest LARP, true and proper. And even though I think on the first day you could see just how big the field is. I think their capacity is 14,000 people. A lot of players were new. I think it was around about the
Mm.
50% mark. So they're not going to have OC tents. They're not going to have all the kit or the gear just yet. Lots of people were trying this out for the first time. And if you go and look through some of the photos, I know Kyrgios has put out some albums for Friday and Saturday already, which is incredible. If you just look at the players, they're all smiling 99% of the time. And
Honestly, like
yeah,
the on-field feedback that I heard, because I on the Sunday, I know we're skipping ahead a little bit, but I walked back with a couple of players who were out of character, and the amount of people who I met, actually, crew and player base, who were new and were just having the best time. Um, and they said, that this has encouraged them to go and try out other LARPs. And they had been a bit nervous, and they'd actually been encouraged to join the hobby because it was new and because they knew that new players would be around them and they wouldn't be the only ones who didn't know what was going on. And I think Menhirs Fate has come into the market at such a good time for the hobby because we've had COVID, we've had people come out of that and who are now looking to find their, childhood again and go and do all these fantastic things. And um, just watching them find the hobby, I was like, this takes me back, to last year where I was finding the hobby. And for people like yourself who have been in this for like 10 years, that must be so refreshing.
oh, I felt the gold dust. I really felt the second-hand wonder of those U players. Like, I remember the first time I showed up at a fest, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the rest of my life sorted. We got a lot of
Literally.
that. I saw one player. I was walking back to OC after Friday. Yeah, it was Friday night. We finished monstering for the night, and he recognized me from crew, and he said, "Oh, thank you so much. This is incredible." Of course, I'm very gracious, and I say, "Thank you. I know I'm great." And of course, ask her how you find the event, and it's a new player, and this player has never played a fest LARP before, but they've done it. They said they've done a smattering of university LARP stuff, and he said, "Oh, it's okay. It's actually kind of fun. It's what led me to this. It was like my gateway drug, if you will. But this is just beyond comprehension, I believe was the words he used. And he said, I've been unable to stop smiling for 6 hours,
Oh,
and I'm
that's
so
cute.
excited, I don't think I'm going to be able to go to sleep tonight.
That's really cute.
Yeah, and that
I
was
mean, the
just Friday.
polls kind of
Just Friday.
that anyway, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
super cute. I mean, also just a shout out to the new players in general because a costume quality, the standard was so high. Like every single place I looked, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I can't believe these new players. And then secondly, just their their response to the rules and the way they implemented them on the field, from battle to keeping things really icy in icy areas. I was really I thought we'd have a lot more um, maybe battle instances where people were unsure of the rules or maybe they would do kind of basic things like not pull their blows and stuff. But there was so much respect for the crew on battle and so many respect for the rules that it didn't feel like 50% of the player base were new. It genuinely felt like these were seasoned LARPers, and I know we
Mm.
only saw like the battle elements of that, but yeah, people really threw themselves in, and I can't wait to see them grow as LARPers as well.
Yeah, even after our first few skirmishes up in the woods, we had the columns of players going back out again, and they were applauding us. It was IC for them. They were IC leaving the field, but they
Mm.
didn't care. They gave us a round of applause and thank yous and bows and
Yeah, it's really
everything.
cute.
It was wonderful. And yeah, on your point around them adopting the rules, I think this rule system, if you go to Fest LARPs for the mass combat and the spectacle of the grand melee, this is the system. It's nailed it.
Epic.
It's easy to pick up and it encourages role play. We've seen that all the way through the rules writing. I've seen that at least. I like to think I've yelled about it enough in this bloody podcast. But the um the most wonderful thing is to see that come to fruition and that players old and new are leaning into it. I see a lot of familiar faces from Empire, and the combat system encourages role play. So when, like you said, people forgot the rule or didn't understand what something did, instead of just ignoring it and going on, they would overreact to it. And some of them, even when they were hit, they would like stagger back and go, ah, that kind of thing to
Mm.
register the hit, rather than just taking, right, that's one of nine, that's one of eight, one of seven, so on and so forth. And the quality of the actual role playing, the executions, I think we rarely got a 5 second execution, but there was always appropriate role play. There was like,
Yeah.
send this scum into the abyss, execute, that kind of thing. Lots of very dramatic, like, this is for my friends. And they really, really got into it. And
Yeah.
I don't think we suffered. I know that you suffered an injury on that poor ankle of yours right at the
That was my
final.
own fault. I was, yeah, nothing to do with the players. That's just me not seeing how the rabbits sort of live in the forest. I think I was doing a one-on-one with someone. I just stumbled back and I heard something go a little bit snap, and I was like, oh, oh no. But just also on that note, like props to the crew that like the ambulance crew and stuff because they were having a blast. I don't think they'd seen anything like this before. And I was sat getting my ankle treated, and she was like, "Do you mind if I sort of start filming this for my partner?" And I was like, "Please go ahead," because they were just having as much fun as us, which I'm sure is the same at other fest larps. I'm sure it's very new for them, but they were loving it just as much as we were.
Yeah, and we saw a few snippets of there's some kind of behind the scenes filming going on of a
Mm.
professional grade. I don't think we're allowed to share more than that at the moment. But again, another feature of LARP 2.0, the marketing machine for this, the web presence, the website, the character builders and stuff like that. It's smooth, it's buttery, it's 2025. It's I'm really intrigued to see what comes out. It might be like a behind the scenes at a Fest LARP, or how to make a fantasy world. I can imagine the title being. And they've interviewed a lot of like the crew, a lot of the directors, of course, and they've got these. I saw them taking some wonderful panoramic shots of up the
Mm.
hillside over the actual camp, and the battles themselves with all the smoke. Oh, I'm sure it's going to be fantastic.
It's going to be epic. I
Yeah.
do think like um one thing that they've really picked up on is the power of, like marketing these sort of hobbies. I don't know how they're planning on scaling it. I think one of our friends actually brought up that how do you upscale this kind of event and allow players to have the same depth of experience? Because, we have a relatively small, I mean, it's still 750 people, but compared to like some other labs, that is quite a small player base. And they had the fortune of being the first. So they had these amazing one-on-one encounters, or they could take some friends, go into the woods and expect something. And it's how do you scale that up for, a greater amount of people. So I'll be really excited to see how they do that. And what they've done is they've tapped into things like TikTok and YouTube, and that's how you get people into the hobby now because that's where people are spending their time. And it's the first LARP that I've seen. I'm relatively new to the hobby, but it's the first I've seen to do it with quality. And like the film equipment they use and the time that's put into capturing the event for marketing has been really cool. The website design, the character creator are things that have got people excited for the event, and that's so important when you're capturing the attention of new people. So props to them for doing that. What do
Mm.
you think? the plan is for them to upskill, and how do you think they would implement it effectively?
So the opinion pieces. So let's start talking about like the rough edges.
Mm.
Um, I think combat crew for first of all, if it's so far that the plot is new, so it's developing. I don't think it's fair to say it's thin on the ground. I had a chat with Ian before actually going to E1, and from being on the crew side of things, there is a lot that has been written, and it is deliberately being held back from the player base to drip feed it in. I think the plot is going to scale and get nice and meaty and interesting. But for E1, it's lots of combat, opening up these encounters and meeting the baddies for the first time. And of course, that's going to continue for E2 onwards. I think that's kind of our job actually as crew members is to extol the virtues of crewing at these kind of
Mm.
events. And I think I had more fun crewing than I would have had playing. If
I agree
of course
completely.
I didn't play, but being able to engage with all the different parts of the world from the baddies' point of view, I think we've picked up a lot from all the different cultures, the guilds coming through, how people interact, and even the things they say, like the stuff they're yelling at us, or the roles we're fulfilling as the Fallen, who were the baddies for this particular event. We were protecting convoys and magical items. What are those magical items? Why do they matter to players? And we'd find out mid-combat, which was very
Yeah.
cool in terms of world building. But sorry, I'm pontificating. To answer the question of scale, so I think this is going to explode personally. If
Mhm.
you've got 750 players, 50% of which are new, you've got what 375 brand new people, and a lot of them came in pairs, and they said, "Oh, you're new. I've come with my partner, or I've come with a friend, maybe a couple of friends, but there were no real big groups." However, these people I chatted to, and these were mainly people who killed my monster. I'd have a chat, and once the melee had died down, I'd have a little chat on the way back out, or I'd catch them OC, right? They said, I'm bringing every single one of my friends to this. And I think
Yeah,
you talked about those new players and experiencing it for the first time. There's going to be a look in their eye, perhaps a little glint, and they're going to go back to their LARP societies at uni. They're going to go back on their personal discords. They're going to go home. They're going to go into their local hobby shops. They're going to go into their local D&D clubs, and they're going to start recruiting three or fourfold. And as we go into the spring and summer, we've only got 5 weeks until the next event. It's fresh.
crazy.
It's spicy. It's come out the oven. It's oven ready. There's a beautiful pie crust, and the filling is warm. Yeah, I think that new player number from 375, I wouldn't be surprised if it hit 1,000. Maybe
Yeah,
another uh, another 600 or so new players, right? With those original 375, adding that up to make the total 1,000. But I really wouldn't be surprised if each person who's new brings another two of them next time.
not even new LARPers. Because I know maybe you do as well, but a lot of people who were quite hesitant and a little bit skeptical of what was promised with Men's Fate, so they took a bit of a back step and sort of, we'll let other people experience it, then we'll jump in. And I think there's going to be a lot of seasoned LARPers that hear all this great feedback and like, you know what, we'll go and give it a go. Um,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
that'll be really exciting to see as well. But
Yeah, no.
just
Uh,
on the, oh, sorry, you go.
my second point was going to be, yeah, that's just the new players, and I think we're probably
Mm,
about to make the same point. The experienced LARPers, the experienced Fest LARPers who have sat on the fence and waited for E1, and let's be blunt, it's good. The crack is good.
mhm.
The crack is moreish, to use the Peep Show reference there. I think we're going to see the numbers explode for E2.
Yeah,
Like,
I do
I
too.
wouldn't be surprised if it's 2,000 people, 2,000 players.
Ooh, 2000, should we place bets now?
I,
Let's
I
go.
yeah, I'm confident. I will bet.
Yeah.
I will cover your E2 crewing ticket if we don't hit 2,000 players.
Aren't they free?
Uh, yeah.
Okay, then I will cover your E2 ticket. I'm going to say 1,600 players.
Oh,
A
okay.
little bit. Mm,
All right.
but we'll see. I also will say if there's anyone sort of listening, I don't know if there will be, but if there's anyone listening who, doesn't necessarily have like a LARPing friend base who wants to dip their toes in. It's such a welcoming system on the player side, but I've never crewed before and I didn't know what was going to be expected of us, what the camaraderie would be like, and it is so cool. You get to learn the game system at a sort of in a way that where your character, you wouldn't feel threatened and you're not trying to protect your character, you're just going to give players a good time. You can learn the calls, and just there were a lot of new LARPers in our crew section, and they had so much fun. And getting to see like what's coming up and what the NPCs are going out to do, seeing the monster suits, and you just get to hear some of the best role play. I think some of my best times are when I were lying on the field dead and listening to the
Mm.
to the players just talk around us and the relationships that they were building. I think there was a quote where they were talking about the gods and they were I'm trying to remember exactly what was said, but there was a group of guys who had just lost a couple of like their friends. They'd lost the battle and they were having the best banter about what it was to be wise, and I remember just having to turn my head very slightly to they couldn't see me laughing. Um, and it's honestly so many instances. And yeah, if you hear about this and you really want to give it a go and you just want to see what it's about, crewing is such a great way to do that, and you feel really looked after. The catering was awesome. It was like
Oh,
very
yes.
nutritious,
Yep.
warm. The all of I mean, I don't think I could name a lot of the directors, but I met them and they were so welcoming and so thankful. And they threw a little party afterwards for the crew, and yeah, just you feel very welcome and very respected. And even the players, because we're not wearing, I mean, every other time I've crewed, I've been wearing an orc mask, so you don't really get to know who you're against. But here, because the Fallen had just blue and white makeup, you were quite recognizable. And I remember speaking to a lot of players post battles, and they were, we just analyzed the battle and we could recognize each other when we respawned, and we just have the best time. So you make a lot of good connections,
Definitely. Definitely.
which yeah, it's awesome.
There's familiar faces in the line that you know from other LARPs. You're like, right, let's have a good scrap. But even some new
Mm.
players, there was one particular player, uh, beautiful like black plate armor and a big round shield and a sword. And we had we basically had a like a grudge match across a few different skirmishes, and we started to recognize each other at the start of each fight. Like, come on then, let's have a go. I think that player won 2-1 overall. But just watching these rivalries build and the quality of combat, I think I've already said it, but just it's for those of you who've been to ILARP events down at Eversley or the like, or Feast Your Eyes, that is I would call that a film LARP. It's typically player bases of like I don't know 50 or so, maybe plus or minus 20 each side, depending on what the event is. Right? Could be small, could be quite large, but rarely over 100. They are, I'd say, UK leading, exceptionally high quality, and it's all about. I think one of the core rules is react to everything and don't expect a particular reaction, and it results in these very cool thematic battles where people don't want to win from a hit point basis. It's just we see how the narrative goes and see what happens, and it means there's a lot of random elements in there that make it very exciting to play. And the two directors for that, Johnny and Kitty, are on board for Menhirs Fate, and I can honestly say that it just feels like a big Eversley event. If I
Oh,
always
okay.
wonder, does size make something necessarily better? For some things, it absolutely does not. But in this case, yeah, big Eversley, big thumbs up.
Big thumbs up. Also, like I guess linking to that, one of my sort of reservations about crewing was the lack of creativity I thought would come with it. But because this is such a new LARP, and because the directors are giving us a lot of free reign with molding these characters, like we got to sort of shape what the Fallen are and how they act. And like writing a brief and reading a brief is one thing, but then like living it and giving it, like a vocal palette and how they interact with each other, and like that was really fun. I remember we started off the weekend with how do the Fallen talk to each other, and we started off with quite a comedic group of people, and we were just shouting the most random things at trees in the forest. And then we grew to quite a formidable force, and we had heavies, we had bastions, we had I mean, your costume was terrifying. We had knights
Oh,
with
they're Horfrost
sort of
bastions and wardens. We had
yeah, like
mages. Yeah,
it was really epic. So seeing that shape itself over the weekend was cool. And we've still got like, what, three, I can't remember how many more groups of baddies are out there. I don't really necessarily want to spoil it, but there are more forces of evil coming. And what they look like on the field yet is kind of it's decided, but it's also undecided because it's down to the crew to go out and build that force. So if you want to, go and shape the baddies of Elandria, there's so many opportunities to go do that.
and we got to hit
And
hard.
yeah,
We got some.
so hard.
Not we're not trying to kill players. That's not the intention. We're trying to give you epic battles. However, epic battles do entail the death of players, or I should say player characters. Just to be explicit, no one actually died at this event, which I think was the only thing I said in the
We
run
know
up.
of.
The only thing that could ruin this is an actual death, and there has not been one, thankfully.
Touch
So,
wood.
touch wood, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But being able to be like feared and respected as monsters, the first few skirmishes on the Friday night, we played these kind of frosty zombie kind of vibes, and we were easy for them, but we'd also know when there were loosely either lots of veteran players or lots of new players on those skirmishes, and we were given the free rein to up and down our stats a little bit and react appropriately to the people on the field. And there's a mix of like safety, like avoiding crushes, for example. We had opportunities to encircle them, but we didn't because the crew was well briefed and well led. Shout out to our fantastic skirmish captains there. And when the players were more veteran, that's when we could like, right, let's step up the aggression, let's push them, let's use a bit more fear, let's really get inside their heads. Because for a new LARPer, you're having a great time, but when a Hoarfrost Bastion or perhaps a Rock Troll walks up to you, you flee because they're so you could see in their eyes, and it was just wonderful to see again.
Terrifying.
They were there. It was real from their point of view. And when this rock troll, I was fighting in a line, and then a rock troll just comes up behind someone, and puts its big claw on their back, and they think it's a friendly. They turn around, they look at this thing that it is 8 foot tall, and they let out an
So
involuntary
cute.
little whelpy scream. They were like, "Aah!" And they just, and then here's why I fucking love the player base. A new player, as far as I was aware, instead of going, "Oh, you started me, now I'm gonna back off," they thought if it stuck up on me, I'm so dead. And the monster suit hadn't used any calls. The player just dropped to the floor and started
Oh
bleeding
my god.
out. And I was like, in my head, I was like, round of applause for them, round of applause, because if someone gets you like that, you're gone.
You're
It's over.
gone. You're gone,
Yeah.
yeah. That's one
Mechanically,
thing,
yes, you've taken one hit, but thematically, it's over. Sorry, go on.
yeah. So one thing I did notice is um because like the sort of D&D nature of these skirmishes, you just can't predict what's going to happen. That makes it so exciting as crew because there's one instance where I think it's like 10:30 in the evening. We're all shattered and we're like, okay, there's this one last non-com skirmish coming out, and what you just need to do is epically fight this NPC, drop to the floor. The players from the Wonder are going to come up and they're, just going to talk to the person you tried to kill. So we all thought this is going to be a lovely evening, lie down in the field, we don't have to do anything. And boy, were we wrong, because as soon as we started pulling our swords out on this poor NPC, we'd hear these wails, and all like up the hill come maybe sort of 6 to 10 wanders with their swords out, and they hit us hard. And we don't last more than 10 seconds before we're just flattened. And so we got our cheeky lie down in the field, but we weren't expecting it. And I just loved that because we felt like players in that instance. There was that sort of thrilling nature brought to what I thought was maybe just going to be a really quiet end to the evening. And I think there's going to be so many more skirmishes like that when players realize that they literally can do anything in their own story. And I'm really excited to see, like villains get captured, taken back to camp, or, held hostage or interrogated. And it gives them so much more to do rather than you're going in, you kill, you leave. Um,
Yeah,
and I think yeah, it's so exciting for them. So, props to the team for writing that in, and just the scale of monsters that we saw on the weekend. There is a little part of me that thinks, will they over time maybe change what the monsters look like to fit a certain brief? Will they just be scary or will they just be comical given what nation they go into? Because the the range of monsters was vast. We went from rock monsters to executing geese. So um, we saw everything, and over time, will that change? Will be, I guess, a question that links into scalability because. As much as I would love to see a flock of geese just go in and execute a nation, I don't think that's doable. So how will they, utilize those geese in the future? It'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, especially Neep neep, the raptors. Oh my God,
Nearly
yeah.
spat my Pepsi out. Yeah, I think we have to tell the story of Neep Neep because I think that's up there in my top three moments of the weekend.
Yeah, the
Um,
gosh, we're 35 minutes in. How do we structure this? Do we go for the patented shatter song, sort of IC/OC, combat, non-combat, overall kind of five-way split? And the gimmick is that if you want to give it a score out of 10. So let's say combat was 9 out of 10. You have to give it 9 bullet points to justify that
ooh,
particular score. Or do we just
let's give it a
loosely
go.
start at the beginning and talk about Friday and sort
Yeah,
of
I mean,
getting into the plot?
I think the structure's out the window at this
It
point,
is,
but
yeah.
we
Yeah.
can give it a go. I'm just so hyped to talk about this because it was so much fun. Okay, you try and give us a structure and we'll try and stick to it.
I will try my best.
Yeah.
Let's start with Thursday because we get there on
Okay.
Thursday night, don't we?
Hmm.
Yeah, so we've talked about the professionality of the site check. The traders, lots and lots of traders. And again, because I'm a boring corpo, what I noticed throughout the whole weekend is that the traders started to basically empty. I really hope I'm right in my assumption here, but I think the traders made an absolute killing because a lot of the new players I talked to said, "Oh yeah, we're trying this out, and I've just gotten this new staff because this is great and I'm going to do this hobby for the rest of my life." Or words to the effect of, right? So I think the traders will have, it's not just usual pouches and stuff. It's they've sold whole suits of armor, loads and loads of weapons and swords and stuff like that, which will mean that they'll make more specific Menhirs Fate kit, and they'll start to really push the boat out on the quality of it because there's a demand for it, and we're going to start seeing some really nice pieces. And shout out to Adam Skelly of Skelly Leathers.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes, we saw some fantastic stuff in there, especially a fully pearled suit of medium armor for Portavus in this lovely blue sort of fabric leather edging, and then it had pearls which had been halved and then actually sewn into it like a quilted kind of look to it. And it's possibly one
Very
of the most
custom.
beautiful suits of armor I've ever seen in my life.
And
Um,
I think it was custom made for that event,
yeah,
so God knows what we'll see next time. I don't know if this was on purpose either, but the the traders seem to sort of vary in budget as well. It was nice to see some things like on the lower end of the spectrum so people could up the kit they'd bought versus, these high-end pieces that were just extraordinary.
mm.
Um, you mentioned weapons, and one thing that I really liked was um, we had to go and sort of do a door-to-door weapons check, which
Yes, official.
was yeah, it was really fun. And we got to go. So basically, we had to go to people's camps and sort of just door-to-door weapons check, which was I guess really lovely for the players. I made us burp. But I'm so excited. I can't keep it in. The only thing I think I'd mention with that is I don't know if there's anything implemented after that to weapons check. So obviously we did a door-to-door service, but people were still arriving. And I wonder just how they went and checked that everyone did have weapons checked before they took the battlefield.
I
And we
can
also
answer
sort of,
that for you.
oh, okay,
Ooh,
answer
yeah.
away.
I love answering questions. So we did the initial kind of first wave, and then they
Mhm.
had a centralized place for archery weapons check, but they also had a weapons checker in the middle as well. So for those latecomers and
Wonderful.
people coming on, they could do it. But what can happen is if you don't have enough time for it, you get these big queues, and people stood out in the sun. Also, shout out to Sol, as in the sun of our solar system, for blessing our event with delightful hot weather. Sol, our friend, is also lovely, but Sol is not
It's
a,
okay.
however trillion ton gas giant emitting however many quadrillions of photons every second. But yeah, lovely hot weekend, but having long queues in that kind of weather sucks. So they sent us around as like a pre-check to get most of the people sorted.
It's also a lovely way of we met a lot of new players and past players and just touching base with people. And it felt almost like a customer service in a way of you're going out, you're representing what the company stands for, you're giving them a lovely welcome, you're asking them what's drawn them to the event, and you set the tone for the whole weekend. And that was really nice because we met. I had a lovely session where I was meeting some guys from Empire, and I wish I knew I knew who they were, but I rocked up and I was like, "Hey, do you guys want your weapons checked?" And they pulled out 100 weapons. There were loads of them. And they pulled up a chair, they put a little fur rug on, and then one of them started serenading me with a lute, and I had the best time. And they were just telling me, what drew them to the event, and then I got to see them on the battlefield like a couple of days later, and I didn't show them any mercy, but they were just lovely, and yeah, it was really fun going and seeing what had drawn people to the hobby in that specific event. So if they keep doing that, I think it gives people just another layer of security and another layer that they're being looked after, if that makes sense. And so many people were like, "This is such an amazing service. We don't have to go anywhere to get our weapons checked." Wow. Um, and I'd be
Yeah,
interested to know what else they did to sort of emulate that.
yeah,
Yeah, what a great way to start Thursday.
and some of the players who'd you clearly knew as well had actually built their own weapons. Unfortunately, we had to fail a couple because you got the usual sort of Amazon sort of cheap stuff, or I, I feel so bad having to like fail someone's weapons, but it is a safety thing in the end.
Yeah,
And there was two particular ones where the weapon was injection molded. Some of them aren't okay. These ones on the blade they were, but on the hilt they had like a sort of heavy, fully plastic hilt. There was no padding to it, and we were like, oh, sorry guys, that's rough. But yeah, Amazon doesn't make it to UK specs. It's just cheap stuff pumped out in a factory in China. But what some other players had also done is made their own out of like literal foam and sellotape, and they'd spray painted it. And it was so endearing to see like the amount of effort people had put into not just their kits, but also the props as well. And some of them had bought like bits of canvas and stuff and made themselves little tents in the field. So they didn't have the whole bell tent, but they'd just gotten a piece of like 10-meter canvas fabric and made themselves a little classic triangle tent on the field, and
so
tucked up in
cool.
there in the sleeping bag, having the time of their life. And oh, just seeing all of the keen in their eyes, and the dare I say it, the joy of youth was yeah, going around and doing that weapons checking was fantastic.
Yeah, it was really
That's
fun. I'm trying to remember what else happened on a Thursday. Um, I guess for us it was exploring the crew area and meeting
the hill.
who would be our skirmish leads. And oh my God, I'm sure we'll get onto this in our sort of hot or not section, but that hill is enemy number one, I think, of the skirmish
God.
team.
Yeah. So not to put you off, dear listeners, walking up and down there, fine. Doing it, I think I did it 34 times by my personal count across the whole weekend. It's not so bad. It's just a morale sapper, um, and the reason we did it that many times. First of all, we're very busy as skirmish crew. Lunch is at the bottom, fights are at the top, so there's at least three per day, right, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But I'll come on to it into the negatives, but I'll just loosely allude to it now. I think it's something that's easily fixed for E2, but we had a split of skirmish crew. We split up. We had like roughly 60 of us, and we split up into squads of 10. And the idea is each squad could dynamically take skirmishes, both at the top of the hill and at the bottom, which in principle is actually quite a cool idea. It's very flexible. However, what it meant is that with a mixture of like new event and radio comms and logistics, and us still acclimatizing to the site, it was lots of hurry up and wait, which is always the case with crew. Don't get me wrong, but there was also a lot of hurry up, get down the hill, or hurry up, get up the hill. And I think that's very easily dealt with by going, right, half the crew's at the bottom, half the crew's at the top, and they'll just take the encounters respectively at each site, and then you maybe swap over at 2 in the afternoon or something once they've got most of the fights out of the way, or if they just want to break that kind of thing. It's these kind of, when I talked about those little tweaks at the start, it's things like that. And again, this doesn't affect players at all because they don't have to walk up and down all the time. It's just the combat crew.
Yeah, I guess it's something maybe we just talk about now because it's relevant. But we knew there'd be teething problems going into this because it is a first time LARP. It's they're figuring out not just how the game works on field, but also the behind the scenes stuff and um the distance between the skirmish field and the tent. By Saturday we were all shattered. And we'd have to walk down for things that's just as simple as you need a bit of snaz on your face. And you'd get down, someone would put a little bit of blue on you, and you'd be asked to walk all the way back up. And it was really sort of in that moment with the sun beating down on you or the wind flapping around, it was just a little demoralizing. And you were just looking forward to lunch, and you didn't know when lunch was going to be. Um, and so all those things over time will get streamlined, but in at that event it was hard. And
Yeah.
obviously at the same time that we're going through that, they're trying to train new refs who um are great for monitoring battles and are great for people's safety. Um, but they haven't had to walk up this hill 30 times a day. So, they're like, come on, guys, and they're hurrying you up. But you're
Oh,
like,
that
please
was.
don't hurry me up. I am carrying so much weight on me. And, you've just done 30,000 steps in a day, and they're like, just one more to go. And you're like, oh, I'm going to beat you.
Yeah.
um,
There's one like
obviously,
waving
we'd
their
never,
arms like,
we'd
"Come
never do
on,
that
hurry up,
disclaimer.
hurry up!" And all of us are muttering
No.
dark things between each other. I was like, "You have
Yeah.
no idea." The
Um,
worst was being pulled down to the. I say the worst. It was just perhaps the least impactful. Was going down a hill to be told, "Well done, really enjoyed that skirmish." And we're like, "Where's the rest of the debrief?" Like, "Oh no, that no, thank. We just wanted to say thank you. We need you up at the forest in 15 minutes for another 20 person." And like, I'm in a full suit of like black plate and this like fucking awesome helmet. There will be the picture in the thumbnail for this episode, but god damn, the things I thought and kept within my brain. Bear in mind, kept within my brain when the revelation was made that in fact I had walked down the hill for nothing, and it was time to go not just back up but straight back up. Oh, but dark things aside, easily solved by having top crew and bottom crew. Done.
yeah.
Easy.
We were tested, but it definitely banded us together. And I've never come away from a LARP this tired and this bruised. But at the same time, it just made some of those encounters way more funnier. Like we touched on Neep Neep earlier, and that was fueled by just pure desperation. So we had the absolute joy of being on a skirmish where two velociraptors were involved, and we had, I think maybe you had the same experience as me, but I was sort of led to believe that these would be very fearsome beasts, very, detrimental to our health. And we're all lying on the floor, maybe 35,000 steps in. None of us can lift our shields, and we're just broken. And somewhere in the depth of the darkness, we just hear, and we all just break as these two like monsters come running at us, and what ensued was like 15 minutes of the best fun I've had all year. Um, and I think it was so late that even the players were, a little bit like, what is going on? There was smoke going off. There were dinosaurs ravaging our legs. And I don't know what it was you shouted during the battle, but I just had to lie down and cry with laughter. It
It was. I was screaming like, "No, I've got a family. Please don't make me die." When the Adreven are these sort of like animal and sort of beast tamer kind of faction, and I thought, "Oh, that's really cool," but they won't rep it on field. Surprised they did. Reference to earlier with the SFX and the monster suits. The stuff in the wiki happens. It's based. But yeah, these fucking raptors, they led it to me, and I was like, "No, please, no, no, no," and it just went neep 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 neep, rend, as it tore me apart. I just like ripped
was
out my stomach.
We also saw one of our friends get tail whipped in the
Oh
face by
yeah,
accident.
it
And God, it's so funny.
It was like Dave again. Shout out to Dave Turnamoff, previous guest of this podcast, and also our dedicated skirmish
Epic
captain,
skirmish captain.
epic captain for the weekend. I'd already been killed by Neep Deep. Neep Deep had found him, and I heard Neep Deep go num 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 num, and he was just screaming, "It's eating my face! It's eating my face!" for like a solid minute. Just all the players are like, "Are we the kind of like are we the baddies?"
But with the bad guys,
Are we,
yeah.
yeah. And then finally, Neep Neep goes up to our dear friend Reese, and these monster suits have a long tail, and it's got pillows inside it, so you can tail whip. And then Neep Neep just runs up, very much like those. The suit looks much better than this. Don't take this literally, but you know those inflatable T-Rex costumes. You see videos of them running. It's a bit like that when they're fully upright. This Neep Neep was a bit more face down, but it was still kind of like a very endearing kind of like ploddy, stumbly kind of run. But then it capped off this run with a perfect roundhouse kick with its tail and just smacked Reese straight in the face. And it's a pillow, so it's super gentle, of course. And Reese is absolutely fine. He's got glasses on. They weren't even knocked off, but just watching him stagger back from a whip to the face, and roleplay just dying after
Oh,
Neep Neep has
it's
torn a hole
beautiful.
in our line, and it's still going Neep Neep
I'm
as
so
it rips things
crying talking
apart.
right now. It's so epic. Just honestly, like the the quotes of like this just skirmishing was incredible. There was one where I was like, we were in the forest in like sort of bowl. There's a beautiful like way that like the scenery is sort of carved out, and there's like a bowl in the forest, so people come in and protect like the menhir and stuff. And we were against, I think there was like a group of 20, and this guy had this really lovely like golden earring, and we had to sort of act like we wanted, their stuff. And I was like, "Ooh, I can smell your life power." And he was like, "No, that's just Link's adrenaline." And I broke, and I had to sort of go hide behind a tree for like 10 minutes because he really cracked me. Um,
Oh
but
no.
yeah, people really just had so much fun with it. But Neep Neep is an institution. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually again, in terms of countering a former reservation, sort of in the brief of like, oh, there's a bit of silliness in this setting, and there's always silliness in LARP, right? There's always those people who just kind of want to be a bit memey as opposed to gritty, realistic. And I thought if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. But actually, it was quite subdued, and it was only in a few choice moments where that comedy fitted that it actually showed up. It wasn't like, lol, look at the goose, ha ha ha. The goose showed up in relevant skirmishes, and they were niche.
Connect with
And
people.
yeah, and it was the right kind of skirmish. It wasn't like a combat skirmish and the goose was just killing people. It was like a friendly wonder one where they could go and feed the goose, and it would, I don't know, give them some kind of boon. I wasn't on that particular skirmish, but yeah, Neep Neep at like 10:30 at night on a windy hillside on a beautifully warm evening, tail whipping us to shit as we send in the next wave, and the Adrenaline is standing back, just letting the raptors annihilate us. Like
I don't think I fought the Adrenaline once. I
yeah,
genuinely think all effort was on this bloody Velociraptor. Who we thought actually, because of the communication, we thought originally was going to be on our side, and then about a minute before the Adrenaline arrived, this Neep Neep runs down the hill and grasses on us, and we're
yeah,
like, "What?" And this snitch just turns and looks at us with glee as it runs back to bolster through our lines.
yeah,
It was, yeah, very cinematic. And I think we had Johnny, I think his name was, who sort of came, one of the directors,
yeah.
just before the Adrenaline arrived, and saw us all laying on the floor and just joined us. It was like, guys, I know you're in a rough spot, but this is going to be fun, and it was. Um,
There was a
and
great
yeah, it was a great way to end. I think that was the Saturday evening.
I think yeah, that was
Maybe.
Saturday evening. I remember in the Sunday battle, it was Johnny actually, Johnny getting stuck in at the front, leading by example. And one player goes like, foul bastion, back from whence ye came. Guy takes a swing at them. And Johnny just goes, shatter, which breaks your weapon. And then the player just went, fuck, just turned around and walked off. It just absolutely creased me. It was
What was your
oh dear
what
me.
was your opinion on the sort of the calls in battle and how they translated from the wiki?
Really well, actually. I hold my hand up for a person who's read the combat rules and there's literally an episode on it. Just scroll down on the episode list. I hadn't memorized all the calls, and it turned out when we did that little briefing at the start, despite me not being confident on them, I was the most confident in that tent apparently.
Yeah.
So we didn't really know everything. Did that stop us having fun? No. Did that stop the mechanics working? No. When in doubt, people just died. I say people. Skirmish team just skirmish team just died. Or when the players had those calls, they'd just stagger back and start bleeding out. Or they would just go and repel themselves, that kind of thing. The combat mechanics led to a lot of thematic fighting role play, and it wasn't about scoring hits on your opponent. It was about like outmaneuvering them, giving them the better fight, getting your mates involved, and calls like Crush for just turn a heavily armored knight into a Coke can is really good for balancing. You see something like Empire where there was, I'd say pre-COVID, there was an arms race for shields, spears, and chainmail. And unsurprisingly, historically, that worked really well and with good reason. And it's very hard to counter those kind of players. But
Mm.
with Menhirs Fate, if you take it in your build, which does come at a cost, you have to take a certain skill. You've got to take a certain weapon, like a two-handed weapon, for example, and give yourself enough figure points, which are like hero points, to call Crush. Then you can absolutely be your group's anti-heavy armor trooper, but in return, you might not have armor yourself because you spent all your XP on abilities. You might not have as much health. You might not be able to use other weapons, that kind of thing. I think the system has done a very good job of balancing out the relative merits of light, medium, and heavy, but then also the skills used to counter them as well. And heavy
Yeah.
armor, whilst having a direct counter, is still really useful.
Yeah, and I
But
think, we knew going into this that there would be a couple of players who didn't quite know the calls, and we did, we were the victim of a couple like shatter machine guns or like smite that definitely there was one player who just used smite a lot, and I think this is, I don't know, a little bit questionable, but the refs and the sort of team were very quick to stop that and to catch it in its tracks. And given that the base was relatively new, there wasn't much of it, which was really promising.
yeah, I heard maybe, I mean literally 3 to 4 comments about unpulled blows or blows that were a bit hard. And that's including your one, Amber, you mentioned earlier, across the whole
Yeah,
weekend.
it's very
I mean,
safe.
I've had fights at Empire where I personally have had 3 to 4 unpulled blows on me. So the player base seems a lot more mature, if anything, or at least a lot more safety conscious. I think they they,
Yeah, I'd
they
agree.
certainly play in the spirit of the game.
And it was nice to see because on the Friday we started off, with a few skirmishes, but people's confidence grew over the weekend, and I think more people, the groups of people that came out onto these encounters grew as the weekend did. So I think word must have got out about either how fun these were or also how safe they are, because I know a lot of new players come in quite apprehensive about battles and, am I going to go on and get really badly beaten up? But this was really safe, and as crew as well, it felt very safe, and we were always given good rest breaks, and um, players were very quick to apologize if they had, maybe overstepped their blows. But the nature of this universe is that things look cinematic and they look epic, and part of that does come with doing wider blows that take a little bit more time, and therefore, the energy isn't as forceful,
Mm,
and that makes you feel much safer. Um, and then they still have epic feeling to them. And when I was sat on the sidelines with this nurse, she was like, "Is it, does it get a bit scary in there?" And I was like, "No, actually, it's really, really safe." And you're just having fun with the other person. You never feel like
yes.
one of you is actually at peril. You are respecting each other's blows. And there was this one guy that I kept running into every single encounter. He had this huge pike, and I had a lovely huge shield that I got at this event, and it was very good at, you know shielding most of the blows from people. but he used his pike in a way that ripped the shield away and then went in for this big stab. Every single time I met him, I still to this day don't know how I would have survived had it been a real battle. But we'd just meet, we'd sort of sigh because we knew how it was going to go down, and then we'd have this wonderful one-on-one, and I could tell it looked epic, but it was incredibly safe. And I know that other crew members had exactly the same with other players. And I'm really excited for people to get to have that experience going forward.
Yeah, I had a couple of fantastic ones. The first was with a playing the butcher. Again,
Mm.
picture attached, and a lot of the time I would just walk towards a line and point at someone. And a lot of the time, the pointing really fucked them up. They were like, "Oh God!" Everyone would start walking backwards because it's just a guy with a cleaver. You know what the hell is going on? And I did it on the final battle, and this player, she was, sort of 5'4". Let's say petite. Everyone knows what I mean, like a generic petite larper, right? And with this helmet on, I'm like 6'4" from point to top.
You're huge, dude.
Yeah, just like
Yeah,
utterly built out this plate and chain. And she stood her ground. She looked me dead in the eye and
amazing.
started to smile. And I was like, oh, here we go. And it was like, when Eowyn starts to face the Witch King in
Oh
the
God.
third Lord of the Rings film,
Yeah.
and the bass drops. Because at this point, I head slightly leans forward. I'm like, oh, here comes a fight. And I sort of lift up my shield properly and heft my weapon. And I actually see her gulp. But she stands, and then we go for each other. And because it's like an epic moment, a lot of she should probably have a go at her nation because a lot of them backed off at this point. And she stood her
I
ground
don't
with her
blame them. You're
shield.
terrifying.
Yeah, shield
I
and
think
sword.
one of oh her whoever that is, big shout out. Because yeah, that get up was impressive. I remember there was a time where we were stood. I think so. Oh, that's a good one. On the Saturday, there was a time where I think there was 30 crew, and we got radioed up. Oh yeah, there's a skirmish of 125 players coming up the hill, and they want to kill you. And we were like, yeah, we're dead. And the refs were like, can you guys start, goading them? And you just stride out to the front and start yelling things like undiscernible nonsense, and we all scream like "Yay!" And I get just some of the stuff you were coming out with because the players were so far away. We could have said anything, and it was just a top five moments. Very, very funny. But because you had that get up on, it was so intimidating. Um,
Yeah, having
yeah,
like the
I
the
think
big axe, the sword, and the shield, even just the cleave, I just felt like an absolute warlord all the time, and I had the
especially with
stats to
smoke.
go with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Bastion stats are cool. Another fallen sort of gold mine was I think it was called the Hunger. And you've got a couple people in each flank who are given, a lot of speed. I think they're given things to disable mages, and seeing our friends play those was epic. They were very good at embodying those characters. And they don't talk; they sort of just hiss. They're like, uncontrollable geese, and watching those develop over the weekend was great.
They were used like attack dogs. So by the end of it, we had like our
Yeah.
our unit leaders holding them on a little chain, almost. And then when they got tugged back, that was their cue to run forwards, and they just run towards the shiniest, most threatening-looking player, and just like
I think we
drain
need a
all of their like
chariot.
vigor and stuff.
I think we need like a chariot of hunger next time.
We do. Oh God,
We'll,
yeah.
we'll get we'll get your Bastion Knight on the backs of, Soul and a couple of other
Yeah, Sol,
hungers.
Pete, Matty. I think Tiki
Mm,
had a crack when he was monstering as well. Yeah,
yeah.
just whoosh, mush, mush. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, some awesome, awesome moments fighting against certain players. And you talked about the safety earlier. When we're having these epic kind of fights, it didn't feel like I was giving them a win when I would do a slow slam and let them parry it, and then expose a side so they could get a hit in, that kind of thing. And it didn't feel LARPy, it felt real. It was sort of the weight of the night, and this player, she's being nimble and dancing around the side and getting a slash in, that kind of stuff. It was a proper boss fight. And I think something that Menhirs Fate does exceptionally well is dynamic skirmishes and dynamic fights. You talked about it
Mm,
on that battle there. We were screwed. Other systems might have done like, oh, I don't know, let's limit the players. Menhirs Fate does not limit players on skirmishes. It just gives recommendations. And
yeah.
if you bring 80 players on a skirmish where there's 20 crew, you can be sure that you'll be facing 20 bastions. And the lethality in that scenario will probably increase because someone's going to get out of position and someone will get crumped. But the flip side is if the players show up and there's not many of them, on the Friday night there were 3 skirmishes, and on the third one there was only 10 of them, so we outnumbered them nearly 2-1. We came in as a bunch of easy zombies, so they had a kind of Left 4 Dead kind of experience instead. And the skirmish crew were given leeway to choose how they wanted to run their own skirmishes. There's overarching plot for God to decide the reason you're fighting, but how we fight was decided on the ground, and it meant that we could just give the players a very thematic battle all the time without it being scripted or forced. It just felt so fluid. I don't know if you felt the same, but I always felt like I could show up. I've got my basic stat block. I might throw in a cheeky crush or a rend if it's narrative,
Mhm.
and I was totally empowered to do that.
Yeah, and what was really interesting is how well that translated to new crew because, I've am quite inexperienced with how to police a fight, how to, ensure that players are having a safe fight. But it is actually really easy. And there was a group, I think there was 4 of us who were new crew, and we all kind of looked at each other at one point in the battle, and we were like, I think we need to throw in a couple like rends here and there because they're really overpowering us. And those decisions, they're really quick to make, but they affect the players um, lot so nicely. And we had one really lovely wood skirmish where uh, I think one of the guys started sort of chanting about how it was time for them to enact their courage, and he gave this wonderful like
Oh,
speech
yes.
that roused them all. And they'd been on the back foot for a while, and then you saw the dynamic change instantly, where because of his speech, they got into a line, they pushed forward, and the fight went on for another 10 minutes longer than it probably should have. Um, but because of how the skirmishes are paced and um, it made sense. And they were
Hmm.
allowed to do that instead of being told, oh no, your time's up, let's go. They were allowed to explore it in the way they did. Whether that is something that can be scaled up, I'm unsure of. And I think pacing skirmishes is something that the team will have to consider. But in giving the first event and letting them just explore the possibilities of encounters, done excellently.
Yeah, because I remember at the briefing on Friday midday for the fighting crew was there's no limit on player numbers and there's no limit on the timeline for each skirmish. And I
But
thought,
we all
what
gulped.
the fuck? Like, what the
Yeah.
hell are you saying, you fool? This is going to be a catastrophe. There's going to be 100 players showing up against 10 crew, because that's all we've got in our particular units, right, at this point. And we're going to get killed, potentially forever. And that did not materialize. That did not turn up. The players came in, did their stuff, and they got out. And of course, there were limits to the players in the end. There were like the practical limits they ran into. And whilst we were often outnumbered, we were rarely outnumbered 2-1. Very rarely.
I think the guild structure really helps that as well because you won't have the entire player base signed up to like the Adventurers Guild, and they might be the only ones offering, as far as I can work out, they offered particular skirmishes, and then a different guild might have some other skirmishes. So naturally, the player base is decreased as to who can go on them anyway. I think that might be, and I think some of them were quite nation based. So whereas we thought, oh God, we're going to have 300 players on this, 10 through skirmish. Actually, it was just here's a group of friends and a couple of, I don't know, Cyrodonians they've picked up along the way who need to get something. They need to get a book or they need to get a tome. And that's what a lot of the encounters turned out to be. And because there's so much going on in the camp, you've got the dungeon going on, you've got little quests that the guild are putting out. Not everyone has the time to come on skirmishes, or that it's not necessarily in the interest of their plot to do it. So it's well broken up in that regard. But that is something to be seen when the player base expands, if that is sustainable, whether they will have to get a bit, maybe it's the first 30 adventurers of the guild to sign up get to go on. If that's something they do.
Yeah, I
One
think if.
thing,
Oh, go on.
oh, no, 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 this was a bit of a different point. So, yeah.
I was just going to say that I think you're dead right with it. You look at Empire skirmish 70 slots. It's targeted at Varushka, but Varushka might fill the first 50, and then anybody else will fill the other 20. Skirmishes are pretty much always maxed out.
Yeah.
But for this, it was the equivalent would be this is just for Varushka, full stop. So depending on how many
Yeah.
fighters your nation can field, it can vary massively, but you're rarely overwhelmed because you're not exposing it to the whole player base. It's just one particular slice of that pizza. Quite literally, if you ever look at a top-down view of the camp, it is just a pizza.
Pizza is.
um,
But then I think some other fest larps, just quickly linking to that. You get fest larps where the skirmishes are attached to a person and therefore they're closed off to a lot of players because that person who's in charge of the skirmish only picks their friends or only picks people in their nation they know and can trust to go and give a good fight. Whereas with the guild sort of structure, anyone can kind of sign up to it. They can bring their friends, and they just do it because it makes sense to their plot, and a lot more people can come and get involved with them. Um, and you don't necessarily have to be part of a clique to get into a skirmish, which for new players makes the process so much less intimidating, and you can go and get what you want from the weekend without having to, overcome those social barriers which you might in other fest larps. And for if I was to come into this system as a new player, I'd find myself going up for way more opportunities, maybe then making more connections in nations, and it just seems like a really good way to get people to get to know each other and to get those experiences.
I totally agree, wholeheartedly agree. You're
Mm.
talking about those cliques, the guild system, let alone your nation, right? And those skirmishes on nations being limited, it gives you that clique. You can just show up and join it, and you immediately get bonded to those people through those skirmishes and through those encounters. And I think we touched on it earlier, but we saw the cohesion between the players increase exponentially across the weekend. So by the
Mm.
end, Saradonia are fighting in this really heavy block. Erdreven are going around the flanks. This is like these harrying pack of wolves and the like. Hammerstadt are thundering up the middle. Portavas are basically doing what they want. the
Kairos were
Yeah,
a force. Kairos's shield walls were pretty tough.
gosh, yeah. There's a group in Kairos with I think there's 6 or 7 of them matching shields,
Mm.
and they came on
Yeah, they look
a
awesome.
yeah, they looked incredible, and they came on a forest skirmish, and I think we outnumbered them at that point, and we got to form up into that little shield wall, steadily
Mm.
advance towards them, and charge at it. And for them, it must have felt like 300 something. They were the Spartans. And as crew, we obliged and we ran straight onto their shield wall and got absolutely crumped. And because the way they fight, we gave them a really good fight. I think there were lots of veteran LARPers in Kairos, especially in their combat block. We gave them a good scrap. And there were a couple of moments where it felt like, we're gonna crush them, but they stiffened their backs, got back into it, started doing a lot of damage, and they brought it back, and it was dynamic. It wasn't oh, we're screwed because we're outnumbered, it's over. We had that flexibility to give them a good fight that almost knocked them out in a believable way.
Yeah.
I'm almost jealous of them.
Lots of lovely plumes in Kairos. I thought maybe that brief wouldn't translate as well because it it's it's quite recognizable. There was something about it that really stung to me, but also was like maybe this is not going to be great on the field. But seeing them all like in a row when you're going into a skirmish, it's really scary. And mages from Kairos look epic. They've got
Mm.
some amazing crowns and staffs, and I think if I was to go onto the field as a player, Kairos would be straight up my alley. Love it. Um, there's a couple nations that I didn't manage to recognize very well. I still am not entirely sure on the Wonder. I think I've been getting them confused a lot with, like Valdrith and Avaro, but that could just be my interpretation of the nations. Um, Cyridonia translates really well. Lots of people took like the lighting of Cyridonia quite cool, and you saw people with pauldrons that had candles that like were on them, and I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of the briefs have colourful outfits, and here's some
yeah,
subtle things that you won't be able to see on the battlefield that distinguish you between the nations. And some of the ones like Dreven, they got furs, they're more brown palette earthy tones. They are very distinct. The what's the Death Nation called?
Val,
Yeah, that's it, Morvalis. Skulls, great, lovely and easy to
perfect.
recognise. White. Uh,
Clowns,
yeah,
terrifying.
yeah, the bloody death clowns. Oh my goodness me. outstanding. But then some of the other like Portavas, you've got lots of blue and nautical themes. You can start to pick up on it, and I think those looks will solidify over time. But yeah, again, very like a 0.1% critique. Some of the nations were very hard to tell the real difference between, but I'm sure that the role play between them will have been obvious because some of them, like
Okay.
Hammerstad, are a bit more gangstery, so like they have different attitudes to someone from Portavas who's like a Pirates of the Caribbean kind of attitude.
Quickly speaking about Morvalis, I didn't realize that cannibalism was a thing until maybe late on the Sunday skirmish where someone started eating me while I was dying on the floor. I was like, this is a part of the game? And someone was like, you'll taste nice with gravy. And I was like, what? Um, and finding that out mid-skirmish was incredible. So if you're in Morvalis, and you decided to maul a poor fallen on the floor, I salute you because it was really fun to just role play that. Um, and I didn't even know that was part of the game. So, you learn something new every day. But yeah, I'm excited to learn more about the nations. 'Cause, yeah, clearly I don't know everything.
I'm just having a quick look. Is cannibalism on the brief?
I mean, if not, then someone took a real interpretation to the rules. But it was these two, I think they were Morvalis, dressed in red, and they just started going, "Yeah, we're about to eat you now," and they gave me the heads up that that was what the role play was going to be. Um, and they just started talking about how I taste the different condiments. And I was like, "Guys, I got to go respawn in 10 minutes, please." Um, I'm pretty sure it was Morvalis, but yeah, props to those guys because they played it very well.
Yeah, so Morvalan cuisine emphasizes elaborate presentation, rich and complex flavors, the finest imported ingredients or local grown ingredients, which are made possible by undead labor. Some even spend their whole lives cultivating one species of mushroom, for example, safe in the knowledge that the food they cook with it will genuinely be unique and therefore highly sought after. They also are said to make the best hot chocolate.
Ooh,
So
okay.
nothing
I
about
mean,
cannibalism. I think you met a cannibal, not a
yeah,
Morvalan. I think you met an actual cannibal.
just an OC cannibal, and I managed to crawl out in time before they got to me. That's funny. I mean, maybe the fallen is a delicacy. Maybe it's just, we are sort of rare imports. Um, maybe that's the secret to a good hot chocolate from Morvalis is a poor ginger fallen being absolutely bruised.
That picture you sent
Um,
of like, I hope this email finds you well. How it finds me, and that's a picture of you just flat on the floor.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to me this weekend, but I've got like a Harry Potter lightning scar on my elbow, and just like my knees are just bruised, my ankle's obviously a bit splintered, but I think it's just because of how much we threw ourselves into this game and how much fun we had. Whereas, we didn't care what our bodies were saying. We were like, let's go, because the next thing is so fun.
Yeah,
Um, and maybe I think maybe a part of the operations side of the game is actually telling the skirmish crew, it's time for a break, it's time to go sit down. This is fun, but look after your bodies because, otherwise you're gonna. I think maybe this skirmish crew like halved by the Sunday, just the numbers seem to dwindle a little bit.
yeah. I think we got down
Um,
to like 25 to 27 or something like that from the original 60 we were meant to have. So yeah, a
yeah, and when you've
high
got the epic
rate of
battles,
attrition.
you want to keep them.
Yeah,
But maybe we save this for the second episode because I am aware we've been speaking a long time.
yeah, 1 hour and 18 minutes, so we're pretty much in the perfect sweet spot of that hour to a hour and a half conversation about it. And I think, yeah, maybe next episode we can talk about what would we fine tune. And then there's just a handful of things I would, and I think they're easily fixed. And we just got to keep our fingers crossed that the Menhirs Fate staff listen to this.
Hope so. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, I'm excited. I guess with that we finish with a cheerful neep neep, and we'll see you in
I,
part two.
I would maybe just before we do the goodbyes.
Ooh.
I'm sorry, I've forced a neep neep because if you say neep neep 3 times in a mirror in the dark, you will get hit in the face. But um, how overall, how would you rate Menhirs Fate out of 10?
Oh, dang. Do you know what? I'm gonna give. I think this is very harsh of me. I'm going to say 8 out of 10 because I was crew and not player. If I was player, I think it'd be a bit higher. If I was crew, a little bit less. Um, yeah, I'm going to go 8 out of 10. Solid 8 out of 10. That might change.
Interesting.
How about you?
I'm going to give it the full 10 out of 10. And
Okay.
I'm going to, into that score, I'm going to price in some changes that do need to happen, especially with
Yep.
skirmish crew. You talked about scale earlier. If this event is replicated, they will just attrit a lot of crew, and it'll suck for the players. But I think they can easily fix that, and we'll talk about that more next time. I think some calls and stuff need a bit of tweaking. Um, but the fundamentals of this system, the combat is good, the lore coming up is fun, the way the players interact, the way the site is handled, the way this business, and it is a business. This is a leisure activity. This isn't a staple product. This is a hobby. The way this is being run, so far, so good. It's got some serious legs to it. I really wish I was an investor and I'd gotten onto this earlier because I think we're going to see a lot of fantastic things come into Menhirs Fate in the next year, let alone for the many years it's going to run. So I'm going
I
to,
mean, there might still be time. You might
yeah,
still be able to get in.
who knows? Hey, if you're listening, yeah, let
Mm.
me invest. But the yeah, the 10 out of 10, I think currently right now I'd agree with the 8 out of 10. We haven't seen the player side of things, and there's bits and bobs to fix. But I think in a year's time, they don't really need to change much to bring it to that 10 out of 10. And I
No,
think
yeah.
all of the other Fest LARPs in the UK need to take an extremely strong look at what they're doing and catch up. I think the word I heard at the weekend was outflanked, and I would agree with that. This is our new Premier LARP. We haven't seen it fully emerge from its hole. It's a bit like a diglet. We've got to coax it out. And once it gets there, it's going to stand proud and tall like a dog trio.
This is honestly, I think it is a little bit groundbreaking with some of the stuff they've brought to the field. Not even metaphorically, but um, for me, it's an 8 out of 10 because of the tweaks that need to be made. And also, I'm someone who really enjoys like the PvP element of things versus the PvE thing. Um, but then I haven't had a chance to play this game, so I think maybe if we get to crew, I think 3 times, and then we get to play after that, however much we want. Um, and I think giving it a play might raise that bar for me. Uh, but I'm also quite conscious of families who might not find this as accessible as other fest LARPs, but this is early days and they have so much potential with this. So very excited to see this go from an 8 to a 10.
Yeah, I think if to caveat it, if you like Fest LARPs for the combat, right now you could drop all the other LARPs and just come to Menhirs. If you're a combat wombat, you want big fights and lots of scrapping and then celebrating in the evenings, hanging out with your mates and just enjoying the weekend, this is it. And you don't need to wait until E4. Buy your goddamn ticket and get stuck in. Right. I'm happy to end on a neep neep. Are you happy to end on a neep neep? Or do you have anything
Neep, neep,
extra you'd like to add?
neep, neep.
Neep, neep.